All right. So in the last series, we went over SD-WAN, the Cisco Catalyst SD-WAN manager, some of the benefits of using SD-WAN, and some of the architectural components in an overview. And we gave you a brief overview on how to onboard a device with some specific agenda items. Today, for part two of the series, we are going to go into a detailed demo of how to onboard a industrial IoT router into the Cisco Catalyst SD-WAN manager and give you a sneak peek, or rather a full view actually, into the CLI of the router as it comes online, as well as the configuration options in the UI. So we'll go through the onboarding and the demo, and basically it'll be part of the entire series here. So as I said in the last series, there are a few ways to onboard a router into the SD-WAN manager. And there is a bootstrap process where you can specify the configuration that will be applied on startup. And that is if you do not have access to a cloud-based PnP server, or you don't have access to a PnP server, you can use that method to manually configure a device or add a configuration in the router flash that will be used on router startup. What we will be using in this demonstration, and what will be the easiest, most straightforward way to deploy a device, is using a PnP account, a PnP smart account. A PnP portal is a website where your router connects, and the portal redirects the router to connect to the SD-WAN components, including the controller and manager and the validator as shown before. Once we've added the device to the smart account, we can either sync the Catalyst SD-WAN manager to the smart account to automatically download the devices into the software, the device list rather, or we can get the inventory file from the PnP Smart Account portal and then upload that into the SD-WAN manager. There, once we do that, we will also configure a template where we can attach the industrial routers so that once the device is powered on, it goes ahead and configures the router, and SD-WAN manager then brings the device online. And this is the router that we will be bringing online. This is an industrial router 1835 series. It's a dual modem, dual cellular Wi-Fi enabled router with PoE capabilities, serial interfaces, gigabit LAN ports. It also has a CAN bus and industrial SSD that you can use for additional storage. It also has an automotive dead reckoning system where you can use in case of signal interruption from GPS sources. And this is one of the routers in a line of series of the industrial routers. We also have the industrial router, the IR 1101, the IR 8340, and the IR 8140 that can also be used. But for the purposes of this demo, we will be using the IR 1835. So there are two, as I mentioned before, there are two modes of operation. There is the standard SD-WAN mode and there is an SD routing mode. In the SD-WAN mode, these are the ZTP steps, or the zero touch provisioning steps, that you will encounter during the demo. So the first step will be, or step zero will be, adding the device or the WAN edge to a smart account where it will talk to a PnP server. That PnP server will redirect the WAN edge to the validator that will then inform the WAN edge of the IP addresses or the host names of the controller and the manager. From that point, in step two, the SD-WAN manager will configure the WAN edge, and it will also configure parameters for the WAN transport, VPN 0, and also the service VPN. In step three, since the WAN manager has already told or configured the WAN edge with the credentials of the controller and the WAN edge are now able to communicate with each other. They are able to establish a DTLS session between each other and also bring up a OMP session, and so that the VANET can advertise the service routes, it can communicate, and it can also be informed about other routers in the fabric as well. The final session, the final step is the data plane connectivity. In step 3, the controller informed the WAN edge about the other TLOCs or the other WAN edges through the OMP session establishment. And in step 4, once the WAN edge gets to know about these other routers, basically other TLOCs, it's going to try and establish a IPsec tunnel with each of these WAN edges in the fabric. By default, if we don't do anything, the WAN edge will try and form an IPsec tunnel with all of the WAN edges in the fabric or in the network. Once the IPsec tunnel is established, a BFD session is also configured over that IPsec tunnel. The BFD sessions are used for keep alive monitoring for latency, jitter, and other parameters to monitor the data path, data connectivity, link quality. It is especially used for application routing and application management for specific WAN links. The second mode is the SD routing mode, and the PNP process remains the same. However, in this case, once the validator is communicating with the WAN edge, it tells the WAN edge about the IP addresses of the SD-WAN manager. It does not communicate any information about the controller. The WAN edge forms a DTLS connection with the SD-WAN manager, at which point the SD-WAN manager will push down a full configuration for the WAN edge to come online and connect to the manager. This is a centralized model where the WAN edge will only communicate with the SD-WAN manager through a DTLS session. It does not communicate unless specifically configured through the WAN manager to any other WAN edges. To prepare for the industrial router onboarding, we want to have a couple of minimal steps. The first step is to remove the LTE module, 5G LTE, depending on the type of cellular module that you have. This is the primary WAN interface that we will be using for onboarding the device into the SD-WAN fabric. And we want to insert the cellular SIM provided by our cellular provider. Now, keep in mind that this can be either a private or a public provider or a private or public network. So you want to configure the APN beforehand. And in another series, we will take you through those details, not in this one, but you can also do that prior to configuring or onboarding the router. And once you've inserted the SIM, you can reinsert the cellular modem or the PIM, as we call it, back into the industrial router. All right, so let's configure SD-WAN. Let's configure the UI options. And once we've done that, we will also power on the IR. So before we configure the UI options, we will also show you how to configure and add a router to your PNP Smart account. All right, so this is the software portal for PNP onboarding the device for zero-touch provisioning. And we want to go into software.cisco.com and go into network plug and play and manage devices. Here you want to select the right organization and the right sub-organization for adding the device for PNP onboarding. You want to make sure you have your controller profile configured. This is the controller profile configured here. And this is the IP address of the validator. It is a DTLS connection, and this is the default port for which the router will be using to get information about the SD-WAN manager and the controller, as the validator will redirect it to itself. And the organization name is required for onboarding the device. So here we can go ahead and add the device. You want to get the serial number of the device. The serial number is usually listed on the side of the hardware of the router. And you can either import a list of devices using a CSV file or enter a device manually. So I'm going to do that and click on next. Now, this is a key portion. We want to get, as I mentioned, you can retrieve the serial number either through your bill of materials or you can retrieve it through the uh, side of the device. You can capture it from the device as well. You can also do a show inventory on the router CLI if you have access to the router CLI and retrieve the serial number through those means. So I'm going to add my serial number. I'm also going to choose my base bid, which is an IR 1835-K9. You can leave the certificate serial number as is. We want to select the right profile. As I showed you, we were using TME lab, and this will be specific to your controller profile that you set up in the smart account. You want to choose the device mode. So this is a key step. If you're onboarding a device into the standard SD-WAN fabric mode, you want to use controller mode. If you're using SD routing mode, you want to use autonomous. So I'm going to pick controller for this for the initial onboarding. I can also pick autonomous. The steps are the same. The onboarding is still the same. You want to select SD-WAN capable, and then you want to hit save. You hit next, and then submit. Successfully added. Hit done. Now this device is pending redirection because it is not online yet. You can also view logs as the router comes online. We just added the device. So at the start of this demonstration, I specified that there were two ways you could retrieve the device inventory or retrieve the device to add it to the SD-WAN manager. So for this demo, just to show you a little bit, one of the ways you can retrieve the inventory file through clicking on controller profiles, navigate to your specific controller instance, and then click on provisioning file. This is the list of devices that are part of that controller instance. You want to select 18.3 and newer and click download. So now this is all that's needed to set up your smart account and device in the smart account. At this point, we will now go ahead and add that serial file into the SD-WAN manager and then power on the device. Once we configure the template, we will attach the device to the template and then power on the device. All right. Okay. Now, this is the front page of the Catalyst SD-WAN Manager. Now we are going to take the serial file, the inventory file, and we're going to first add it. Before that, we can go ahead and log in. Now, to add the device, as I said, there are a couple of ways you can add it. So you go into Configuration, Devices. So you can either sync your smart account again to automatically sync the devices, or you can upload a WAN edge list. Since we have downloaded a serial file inventory file, we will upload the WAN edge list through this means. Click on that, choose a file, and choose the serial.viptela file. Once you choose that, click send to controllers to sync the device list with the controllers in your network, and click upload. It should say vEdge list uploaded successfully, and it's pushing the serial list to your controller, validator, and manager, and it should be successfully adding the list to those devices. All right, so at this point, we are going to go ahead and configure a group that we can attach the device to so that the device can be configured on startup. All right, so to configure the devices, we go into configuration, configuration groups, select add configuration group, and then create a configuration group. We can name it. You can give a description if needed. Click on next. Now, these are the settings we want to pay attention to, and as you configure these options on the right, you will see those reflected in your network. So on as we saw in the last series, there is a transport side, VPN 0. So you have the MPLS, public internet, LTE options at the moment. We will configure that in a minute, but you also have the server side or the OT connectivity, industrial assets where they are connected and where you can segment your network. That is part of the southbound connectivity to the edge device. The edge device is your IR 1835. And for this one, we have a single router. You can set your site settings, which is at the moment, all you need to do is set your admin access and admin password. You can configure other options such as a banner if needed. The WAN interfaces here by default, you will see MPLS, Internet, and LTE as shown in this graphic here. For this demo, we are only going to use a single LTE interface, so you can get rid of the other ones. So the transport name is LTE. You can name it anything you want, but the key thing is the color. So as I mentioned before, a color is an attribute of the T-lock in the SD-WAN fabric mode. So we want to select the right color for the purposes of forming a fabric and for other uses in case you want to restrict connectivity between tunnels, between devices based on the color, you have the option. If you have an MPLS device, uh, those are specific colors that are used for private networks. So we have public and private colors based on these options. So for us, we need to select either LTE. We should select as a best practice either LTE or 3G. These are colors that will help us easily identify what types of networks these are. We can click on advanced options. We can click an interface name, and this is by default, it will pick the first interface that you will use for PNP. We can also go ahead and specify that. In this case, we can use cellular 040. That will be the primary interface of the IR 1835. We can leave the WAN routing options as is. And we can select a VPN profile, a service VPN profile for the number of segments that you want. I can use maybe a single or two segments. So I'm going to use a PLC segment and a user segment. And I can name these VPN2 and VPN3. So, and I can assign a single interface to each of these. I'm going to go ahead and delete the other segments. And optionally, I can also add the interface that I want to assign to these VPN segments. This can be done at a later stage as well after the onboarding. I can also add routing options if I want to add uh, specific routes that will be used by the service VPN to advertise into the OMP overlay fabric. So as you see, as we change the options, the graphic on the right, we have a single transport VPN and we have two service VPNs for PLC and users that were defined. And this is the visualization of a single edge device connecting to the fabric, and the visualization of two segments or two isolated networks that will be advertised through into the overlay management protocol and to other devices as we configure them at a later stage. All right, once you've done this, let's hit next. We can leave all of these features as defaults, and then you can validate all of your options as correct or incorrect, or if need be, you can go back and edit them. Once you're done, hit create configuration group. Now, since we've added the device previously, you will also want to associate the device to this configuration group. You can associate multiple or single device depending on the number of devices you have in the group. Click next. Click on the unassigned link and select the router that you want. So this is the serial of the router that we just uploaded. I'm going to select that, hit next, and I'm going to hit save. Now I can either provision the devices now or at a later stage. I'm going to provision the devices now. Hit next. It's already selected the device for you. Either you can do that or go ahead and select it. Hit next. Let's select the devices that you want to modify. And in this page, we want to configure a few basic items for the device. So you want to configure the system IP. Again, this is the system IP is used for routing in the fabric or in SD routing modes. Is the IP for the device for the edge. I'll configure four dotted notation. Host name, you can give it whatever you want. Site ID, this is used for specifying which location your device will be in, or this is more critical when you're using the SD-WAN fabric mode, where site IDs, if you have devices in the same site ID, they will not form a data connect or IPsec connectivity. You need to have them in different site IDs for data connection and IPsec connectivity. For SD routing, the site ID specifies which location the device is. It doesn't really use that for data connectivity, as there is no data plane connectivity in the SD routing. So I'm going to give it a numbered notation. And the other options here I can leave as defaults. And then, so we configured the transport connect items. We're now going to configure the service VPN items. So I can configure the VPN interface that we will assign to one of the segments. I can give it a static IP. And I can also specify the subnet mask. I can do that for the other VPN as well. So you can, once you define that, you can click next. And then you can verify all of these parameters and hit deploy. So once you hit deploy, you can view the deployment status. You can also, before we hit deploy, there was an option to preview CLI. You can preview the configuration that will be pushed down to the router. And it's going to be scheduled because the device is not online at the moment. Once the device is online, it's going to get the config pushed down by the SD-WAN manager and come online into the system. So in a couple of minutes, I'm going to show you the device coming online. We'll take a look at the CLI, some of the options, and you know messages that we see on the CLI as it comes online and connects to the SD-WAN manager. You can see the logs here as the device comes online as well. And this is all that's needed from a configuration standpoint to get the router connected to the SD-WAN manager. And this is the SD-WAN for the standard SD-WAN mode. For the SD routing mode, we will show the configuration options in an upcoming follow-on video. But the PNP process to add the device to the PNP portal remains the same. Okay, so we've powered on the router here. And since the router is without any config in default state with factory settings, it will not have any startup config. And the router operating mode is controller mode, since it's the SD-WAN, typical SD-WAN fabric mode. In SD routing mode, it will be the router operating mode will be autonomous. And we have cellular interfaces. You can see it's trying to talk to a PNP server now. The router is starting up its services. You can see that the device cellular 040 that's being used for onboarding the device is up, and it's going to try a PNP on that interface. And here you can see it's connected to the PNP server, devicehelper.cisco.com over a secure communication port 443. The PNP server also resolved the IP. It's now trying to redirect the router to the validator. And here you see the router has been redirected, controller type and device mode, and it's provided the options for the validator IP address and port. PNP discovery was done successfully, and now it is configuring the router. vManage, or the SD-WAN manager, is configuring the router. And as part of this process, there's really nothing you need to do. The router will automatically connect to the SD-WAN manager. If it's a fabric system where you need, it will connect to the fabric, or if not. All right. And then it's now connecting to, it's starting up its systems. It's trying to connect to vSmart, which is the controller. It's connected to the SD-WAN manager. It's starting now since it's connected to the controller, and it is starting up the ONP protocol and services, as you see here, that will form a control connection with the controller. And here you see the handshake with the controller, which was successful. It is also forming an ONP peering state with the controller to start communicating over the fabric. As you know, the control connections are only ever formed with the controller. All of the routing topology control communication is done directly with the controller. And that's the reason you see that connection being formed here, and it has connected here. So at this point, it has been configured. It is configured by the SD-WAN manager. It is communicating with the controller. It took a couple of minutes, and It is now bringing up the transport connections. It is bringing up the data tunnels to communicate with other edge devices in the fabric. And you can see that the tunnel is up. You can go into monitor devices, click on the IR demo, and you can see that the device has come online. You can see the interface statistics for cellular, for example. You can also see the control connections for it. It forms a control connection with vSmart, which is the controller, and the SD-WAN manager. You can see the system status, CPU memory usage. You can see the events in real time as the router comes online, or if there's any changes in its connectivity. You can also see the T-lock, which is your fabric IP and connectivity options here. You can see the tunnel connection. You can see the tunnel connectivity with other edge devices in this screen as well. Now, you can also go into monitor overview, and you can go into your specific site and check the device there. And you can see statistics about its tunnel health, its alarms, some applications used. All right, that covers the onboarding demo. So in the next series, we will go over some of the troubleshooting options and how to look at a device and determine its path characteristics, its WAN characteristics. We will also look at some of the ways you can identify the application routing characteristics for the WAN edge. And we will also look at some of the ways you can do real-time troubleshooting through the SD-WAN manager. Thank you.